caps the development. It caps the potential of exploring or realizing the full potential.
A lot of African countries have been victims of manipulative lending.
Because the cost of electricity is too high for the common Mwananchi. What we mean by common Mwananchi is by the
Common man.
common citizen, the common man.
We're still really, really far behind. And there's data that proves that. The fact that I think, what is it, almost 300 or so million African children don't even have access to school or don't even go to school. One question I had in mind is, as Africa and African nations or individuals who want to contribute to this, hopefully the private sector is empowered within Africa to do this. Should the African countries, nations, or counties, or what have you, should they adopt the way that Western societies have centralized, let's say, the grid, where it's a centralized, complex, large grid? Or should these African nations start to think about, hey, no, we have a clean slate. Let's maybe adopt the off-grid model where you have, those mini grids, if you will, that are powered by solar. Either it's home driven, it's community driven, but you don't have to rely on this massive centralized grid system to consume energy and electricity. Maybe we need to rethink about mini grids or smaller community driven or private sector driven. And I think a good example would be how Africa, instead of adopting landline, the telephony landline, they didn't have to. They completely, leaped ahead many decades and just went right to cell phone. You know what I mean? It doesn't. Yes, it does require some level of infrastructure, but not to the same level as landlines would, which is what the U.S. had to move away from, and obviously it took some time to do that. So, first question I'm curious is the centralized grid versus the off-grid model. What are your thoughts there? Do we need to educate them and maybe shift to more of that mini grid, off the grid model so that we take advantage of modern capability, or should Africa drive towards whether centralized or the renewable energy, go with the centralized, really massive, connected system, if you will?
Yeah, I'll give an example. A recent example comparing South Africa and Kenya that will give a better answer. So again, in respect to, I'll reference a lot green hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Green hydrogen, the future of green hydrogen is dependent on the exploration of renewable energy. So once we were having an exchange between cities in Africa, and we had Kenya, we had South Africa, we had Namibia, we had Mauritania, and then we had twin cities in Europe. So there was Heilbronn, there was Karlsruhe. The conversation was, are cities or are your states leveraging the renewable sources to then produce green hydrogen? And the question that the South Africans asked Kenyans is, are you able to generate your own solar energy? Because if you're able to generate your own solar energy at home, then maybe you can have a decentralized form of producing green hydrogen, which then helps you develop in that conversation. So something we came to realize is that South Africa's energy production is centralized and governed by the national government. And so what this means is all this conversation talking about economic diversification or green jobs, you cannot be able to create it at your local district. It has to be driven by the national government. And where we are as Africa and as Africans, we've seen there's already a lot of pressure from the national government to extend these basic amenities to the community. So if energy is centralized at the national level, what then does this mean for us as in the different districts? It caps the development. It caps the potential of exploring or realizing the full potential. In contrast to Kenya. So Kenya, where we are yes, we have monopolies in terms of the generation of electricity, in terms of transmission of electricity. But then, in the recent years under the National Energy Act, I think 2019, the mandate of production has been decentralized. What I mean by this is, you at your home, you can be able to put your solar panels on the top of your roof, produce your own energy. And if you have a larger farm of maybe 30 hectares, you also are able, okay, unless you follow the licensing, you need licenses as well, but
Yeah.
there is the freedom to produce your power captive. And what I mean by captive is in a decentralized manner, to a point where if your capacity to generate solar energy is higher than you can consume, you can then sell to
To the
the
grid.
generating company of Kenya for them to do the distribution. So with that comparison and with the conclusion that having a centralized energy generation system might limit the progression as a country, then my answer would be, for us as Kenya, for us as Africa, with this opportunity of a clean slate, decentralization is a way to go. Decentralization is a way to really push this infrastructure to the last mile community member, because then we're not limited by the resources of the national government, but then we've opened up an opportunity where I, as a private investor with the financial capacity, I can be able to draft a PPA, so a public-private partnership with a power purchase agreement. What I mean by a power purchase agreement is I have the funding, I've gotten the licenses from the national government, I can then produce my own energy, use it for my use, and sell it to the people. So decentralization is a way to go. I mean, it's shifting from a system where electricity is generated in a few large centralized power plants to where it's produced to a point where it's extended to the small local distributed systems. So that is a way to go if we're really looking to narrow down the energy access issue, the energy poverty issue. I mean, we're at a point where as Africa, 600 million of us still lack access to energy. So then what would be the solution to that? Decentralization.
Decentralization.
Modularization of this production.
Yeah.
I really like your perspective there. Go ahead, Brian.
It's I couldn't agree more. So one huge problem or risk that I see would be averted by decentralizing energy generation and distribution, especially with clean energy, because you don't need as much infrastructure. With clean energy, like solar, for example, wind, it's easier to generate at smaller scale. It takes us away from the need to borrow too much. And I mean, a lot of African countries have been victims of manipulative lending, because of this huge infrastructure project. So the government comes and say they need to build a 40-hectare wind farm, or they need to build 100 acres of solar panels. What does that mean? There's not enough capital. What do? We look for countries that can lend us money, and then you have all these very unfair financial arrangements that are not transparent, that are manipulative, not just one generation, but like 3 generations, all in the name of pushing this infrastructure project. So I think if everyone on their home, that's actually new information for me. I thought it was way more complicated than you made it sound. If I am able to draft an agreement that is legally binding, I can put solar panels on my farm and I can even sell that out. So I think that's the way to go. I actually agree.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot more sustainable. Yeah.
And also, just to build on what you've said, it reduces the challenge of infrastructure. I mean, we all agree that infrastructure development is a very expensive thing.
It is.
Yes. But this concept of decentralization speaks to that gap, because you're opening up or you're lessening the responsibility to the national government by including the private sector.
Yes.
But now the question then still goes back to us as Africa. Do we understand the benefit sharing? Do we understand for how long are we leasing our lands for these private people to develop the solar? And even if this private sector has been integrated into this decentralized form of energy production, the question we need to be asking ourselves, even the three of us at an individual level, is the energy then becoming less expensive? Is it becoming more accessible? Because another very interesting thing, as much as Kenya, we are ahead in terms of decentralization, our energy prices are high. They're the highest in East Africa.
It's crazy.
I did not know
Yeah.
that.
Another interesting thing is Kenya is the largest geothermal producer in Africa. We are number 5 globally in terms of the geothermal potential. But still, our electricity prices are quite high because there was no public involvement in these power purchase agreements that were done, because there's an aspect of public participation that needs to go into this, because you're talking about leasing lands for up to 99 years or 30 years. Okay, now it's 30, but for South Africa, they mentioned theirs is 99 years. So it's an ideal model, but there are parts that we still need to question. So back to Hylom, as much as decentralization is the answer doesn't end there. The question that becomes, by us encouraging our African countries to decentralize the production of energy, does it then lessen the price? Does it then confirm the accessibility of energy, especially to the communities around? Because unfortunately, that's still not the case. Even us as Kenya, we're still grappling with the issues, for example, in Mauritania, where they do not have the decentralized system, but we're still all crying of, we are heavily relying on biomass, we're heavily relying on charcoal because the cost of electricity is too high for the common mwananchi. What we mean by common mwananchi is by the
Common man.
common citizen, the common man. So the question doesn't end there, the answer doesn't end there.
And I think
Yeah.
this is where, we'll have to tap into education, perhaps in a separate podcast as well. I think this is where getting the public engaged and informed will help solve that gap. Because I think you're right. If the public and the people broadly are not involved in the discussion, whether it is nationalized and centralized, or whether it is decentralized with a partnership with the private sector, or high net worth individuals, you're right. If the broader public is not educated on this, they're going to be left behind. And they're going to be left behind, and they're going to have to pay a much higher cost to be able to access it, which again goes back to that 600 million you mentioned. Even if we create these systems, these decentralized systems, would the 600 million or so people be able to access it? It's going to be really challenging. Only maybe a fraction of them will be able to access it based purely on just cost, generally speaking. So I do like your thinking there is, how do we educate the masses? And we have a unique opportunity given that the median age in Africa is 18, right? Across, the different countries, which means, 50% of the population is open to learning. They're the younger minds, right? And even if you go to, let's say, 20 or below, it's going to be a significant percentage of let's say that's 56% of the population, if not slightly higher. So we do have a unique opportunity, I think, to try to drive towards a decentralized, off-the-grid kind of model, but we need to educate the masses along the way. So, leading into that question, I am curious, how do we then ensure that as these, let's say, decentralized models or renewable energy or just these concepts are being taught, how do we ensure, though, that the rural area are not left behind? Like, what needs to be done? Because I feel like the cities are probably going to be okay. They're going to catch up to it. They have higher capital, access to it, and so on. But the biggest fear is always the rural area, because that directly ties to access to school and access to modern technology, modern capabilities, and so on, and modern infrastructure. But what would be your thoughts around not leaving the towns that I grew up in? Because I grew up in a little village, right? It was a refugee camp that became a village eventually. I would imagine it was outside of Khartoum. That particular village would be left behind. So how do we, in this case, ensure that it is reaching beyond the middle class, beyond the cities, where the majority of Africans kind of live?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question.
It is.
I'll answer it in two different levels. At an individual level, us as Hylom, Lorraine, Brian, under this podcast of Voices of Africa, and on a technical stand. So from the conversations we tend to have on the side, I bet there's an understanding that us as a public have power and have a say towards climate change development, towards energy change development. And as earlier stated in this conversation, there's this concept of just transition. You can look it up a bit later, and even for anyone who's watching. The just energy transition is built on three fundamental things. It's called the three Ps: the people, the planet, and profit. So the profit and the planet cannot exist or cannot survive or develop if the people are not central. So again, I'll reference still the UNFCCC. So with all this, it's a conversion that has dated back from 1971, if I'm correct, on the climate change. So there has been a lot of stock taking on what is working and what is not. In the previous almost 30, 40 years, there has been now a concept called leave no one behind, similar to the just transition. But this is an entirety that is mandated, is expected of the different, be it private sector, be it public sector, be it the CSOs. Every development has to have a component of leave no one behind. At our individual level, with this understanding of just transition and leave no one behind and the power of the people, we can then go back in our communities and just convey this information and mention that there is actually even more interest towards civil society organizations. So these are communities. You see, in the rural areas, they're the villages or they're the communities, but there's always a village representative, be it the chief, be it the chairman, encouraging those people to set up civil society organizations that just question because they don't have information, but to just question. It tends to bring more traction to these projects working in the city level to speak to this because, as I've mentioned, each project is mandated to have a concept of just transition. So if a community, even if it's a big community, has one civil society organization, they can shield themselves toward making sure they're not being left behind. It's a stretch, but again, what we can agree as Africans, it's time for us to take these matters in our own hands and try to do as much as we can with the little that we have. So the first step at an individual level is us communicating this information to our respective communities, encouraging them to set up civil society organizations to just question. That's number one. On a technical level, in a single answer, I'd say governance. Governance support is what is needed to ensure that the rural aspect is being considered in this. Because if your national government or if your subnational government is, number one, technically empowered to understand these impacts, if they're financially guided to make allocations in the budgets they're being given by the national government, then you're already making headway. But it all revolves down to governance. Do the leaders driving that community, or do the leaders in these cities understand the impact to the person in the rural community? Do they understand the difference in the level of impact to this person living in the city and to that person living in the rural aspect? What we've done from the organization I stand in, we had a project called Resilience Initiative Africa. So this was a project funded by AUC, the African Union Commission, and GIZ, the German Agency for Development. Essentially, what it did was supporting the member states of the AU to build their capacities at the governance level to first understand climate change, its impacts, and support financial allocation. So in a nutshell, I'd say the way we can really move forward is having our eyes on the governance and trying to mobilize resources to be directed to the governance level for them to then have the capacity, the resources, the understanding. Then once they do the developing of the policies, the city-specific policies, the district-specific policies, you will be certain that there will be an allocation speaking to that rural setting or to that district because they understand and they can quantify the difference in impacts. Yeah.
There's three things you mentioned: resources, capacity, and understanding. I think those are the three things that we need to push towards governance. I want to throw in one more thing I feel is important and to some degree maybe somewhat lacking. It's intention in our government governance umbrellas. I mean, as much as capacity is built there need to be the right intention. And I think this is maybe a thing of trust in a lot of African societies, communities, people, where you have like a breed of leadership that we don't trust to have the best intentions at heart. So I think as much as the governance bodies are empowered, they need to be intentional as well. How we get there is always a whole other conversation, because it's a whole intergenerational conversation, kind of going back there, what the people we have in governance and all that, but they need to be intentional.
Yeah, I think you're right on the being intentional.
Yeah.
I think the challenge always is going to be those who want to profit will always chase
Mm,
profit versus intent. And so I think
mhm,
this is why the education and kind of helping the masses understand that people are going to exploit. Like, we're never going to get away from that. You know, companies are going to exploit. They're going to want to create monopoly at some point. They're going to, because they're in the business to create profit, right? And so profit is going to be their number one motive and probably intent. Now there will be others who have, you know, a more cleaner vision, if you will, or mission, where they do want to transform, they do want to benefit the broader community. But I think you're right. It's probably more educating. Yes, we can drive for intent and try to push for that. But I think helping the masses understand that this is just going to happen. We're never going to get away from it. This is just humanity in general, if you look at the course of history. But how do we get enough people to understand the impact so that they are very well aware of what this means and how it works, so that when they do see potential organizations that are going to try to exploit this, or entities, whether it's internal or external, they can call it out and they can, find the right way to organize, govern, and be able to push back. But I don't know if we're going to ever avoid, entities trying to take advantage. I think what we do is, while those entities are doing what they do, how do we ensure the broader community is benefiting from that windfall, if you will, as opposed to it, being captured at the top and then leaving Africa. And kind of
mhm,
like chocolate is a big example of that, or coffee. Like,
yeah.
again, these are very simple sectors. However, it's true. You have all of these, really, really cheap commodities that leave Africa, but when you go elsewhere, you can buy a cup of coffee that's worth more than 2 pounds of bags of coffee. Like, it's just insane to me,
Yeah.
the how it transfers over. Um,
Mhm,
I know that was just a simplistic example, but I think intent will be really difficult to uncover. We just know they're
mhm,
going to do it. That's just how
mhm,
companies, entities operate. That's just the reality of it. It's
mhm,
our way of understanding and providing awareness so that the broader community can catch it and be able to fight and push back against it as much as possible, in
and
essence.
push back. Yeah. Kind of equipping people to ask the right questions, I think, is where
Exactly.
we need to get that point. Yeah.
Yes, you need people to understand, yeah, to understand the concept enough to ask the question, but then we need
Mhm,
to empower, individuals that have the right heart, the right mind, right intention. How do we,
mhm,
provide capital to those organizations? So I think it maybe in,
mhm,
in future sessions, or once this is posted, maybe we can add, like, trusted nonprofit organizations, or the private
mhm,
sector that's really doing some good work, but also is intentional in the way that they do it. Those are,
mhm,
the groups of organizations, or like different, government officials. How do we elevate their name? Because,
mhm,
perhaps they're not occupying the space and they're not capturing the minds, but
mhm,
how do we give them a space, a platform, or how do we, create a system that elevates their profiles and their names, so that we have more of them doing the work,
mhm,
because we know they're going to eventually benefit the broader community.
Hylom, what I'm getting from the conversations or the questions you've been raising is you're very particular on how does this information get to the people.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very your concern is how centric are the people in this conversation and in this change.
Yeah, you are spot on.
Yeah,
mhm,
and what I can say from what I've seen in the few years, the civil society organizations really speak to this
mhm,
in the sense that what you've mentioned, Hilo, we can't really change how the world works in terms of economic developments. There will be the private sector still fighting for their share. The government will still fight for a share. But regardless of the different scenarios, the public is the one that is um, on the losing end. But then this CSOs now, this activists, the Pan-African organizations, really try to integrate a legal aspect in the conversations because they understand the only way they can empower the communities to have a say is if they understand their rights as communicated in their legally binding documents.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's still a long shot, but there is, I'm really, really encouraged by the rising number of CSOs that are being developed and being founded. But again, another question you raise is how do we support funding of such initiatives? That's
Yeah.
another jargon that needs to be explored.
I think
That
you're
is
spot
true.
on. But you've caught up. Yeah, that's my mindset. Is what I've learned is information is king, and we're in the information age right now, right? And false information travels so much faster. Especially if you have capital, you can misinform a lot of individuals, or you can leave them out of that knowledge. And I'm learning as I age and continue to get more and more experience. What separates, I think, individuals that are climbing the ranks and those who might, yes, obviously opportunities, your hard work, your intellect, and what have you. But a lot of it is just access to information and access to the network. That's to me is becoming a bigger driver. And so that's why, yeah, I'm big on ensuring we have the right information reaching the right people. So, for example, if the people of Congo knew what lithium and cobalt really means and how that translates to trillions and trillions of economic development around the world, I wonder how they would operate. Would they operate the same or would they operate differently? And that's the thing I think that's missing is it's one is because it's lack of awareness. Two, obviously, it's because they don't have access to the resources, to the money to be able to provide for their families. Obviously, they're not going to care. Well, who cares what Tesla's making out of lithium batteries, right? They're not going to really care about that. They care about how do I get my kid to school, and how do I provide them the basic needs, whether it's medical, food, or what have you. But I think we have a unique opportunity to capture the minds of the youth. That's why I'll always hit on the median age of Africa. We have a massive young generation. And if we can get enough information distilled to them, especially because we're in a digital age, information get to them relatively quickly now than it did in the past, is being able to capture those minds now before they get in their mid-20s and then early 30s. If we can capture that audience now, they will be in a position to be able to have a cascading impact, because this is going to take many, many years. It may take a decade plus, or if not multiple decades, to really, really get enough of those minds activated and to do something, positive, if you will, through this.
And the other question we also have to ask ourselves is, are we also diversifying the means of access to information? We're talking about the space of internet and data, but if our main concern is a rural community, are we having technologies that maybe disseminate information through the USSD, the SMS,
USSD,
instead
yeah.
of access to internet? Because there have been some startups I've been seeing within the climate space that are able to send notifications and messages as SMSs on climate conversations. Because again, people have the small phone. Brian, how can we describe the button
The
phone,
the not smartphone.
the not
Yeah,
smartphone?
yeah,
So the other question should be, are we also finding avenues to communicate to people who don't have access to internet?
yeah.
Yeah.
Language is going to be a huge part of that, because a lot of these studies or reports or facts are spread in the standard languages. It's either be English, French. But what about that person in the village, refugee camp that later became a village where Halem grew up? Are they understanding when you send them a report in English and tell them this is the impact that we're facing, this is what we can do to address it? Are they understanding it? Africa is very diverse in terms of languages, and that drives understanding. If you communicate to me in a language that I understand, that is personal to me, I'm very more likely to be invested in what you're saying or what you're
Yeah.
trying to talk to me. So that goes into education. And I know there are organizations, for example, now that are trying to build apps, for example, that teach young kids in their language of origin, just so they understand things quicker, they understand things faster. So yes, to your point on diversifying how we communicate all this to different audiences, especially at the community, rural level, it's going to be very important for sure.
Absolutely.
A question to Hilo, again, with what you've seen in the previous years and where we're at now in this 21st century. What has there been any strides in this topic of access to education, especially to maybe the displaced communities? Have you seen some active action points in this, or it's still the same challenges we've been grappling with that we're still grappling with right now in respect to access to education?
Oh, that is such a good question. Um, Based on just research and just talking to different individuals who are closer to the ground, we're still really, really far behind. And there's data that proves that. The fact that I think, what is it, almost 300 or so million African children don't even have access to school or don't even go to school. And if you look at what is the population, is it a little over 1.2 billion or something like that? And if
Around there.
the median is 18, so half of that, let's say 600 million are children, I guess, 18 and below. And then half of them don't even go to school. That is an insane amount of, that insane is not the right word. That is a significant amount of the young population that doesn't even have access to basic education. And then you have the other, let's say 400 million that are going to school, and they're also faced with a lot of challenges, even going to school. Like one of the data points I was reading is that on average, the teacher to student ratio is like 1 to 80. And in some cases, it's like 1 to 100. So one teacher to 80 students or one teacher to 100 students. That's an average, right? Some schools are going to be better. In the US, if you get to 1 to 25, parents start to freak out. That's a big gap. And it's not just that the gap, the teacher to student ratio, it's also even the teachers that are teaching, they don't always have the qualification because there is this significant gap of available teachers. And so who knows how many millions of teachers need to be hired or brought to speed or educated and certified. You also have the gap of, qualified, teachers that are available, right? Because again, if you don't have enough of them going through the system, you're not going to have enough teachers going through the system that are readily available and certified to be able to teach. So based on just that and just other infrastructure challenges, even if I use myself as an example, we would have to walk miles and miles to be able to go to elementary school when I was in Sudan. And I'm sure it's gotten better in some parts, but based on how Sudan is operating or even different parts of rural Ethiopia, I doubt that has gotten better. If anything, it's either the same or has gotten worse. But yeah, that's a really great question. I think we're still really, really, really far behind. If you look at the number of students, kids that are able to even just attend school, let alone those who are attending, and the challenges those that are attending are facing today. I think we have a long, long way to go. And in my mind, this is probably the biggest puzzle that needs to be solved. Once you can solve this kind of gap or challenge, then I think you're building more skilled individuals who can start to create, their own companies or own entities, and it's just going to have a cascading effect, right? Then you'll have more teachers that are going to be available. You'll have more engineers that are going to be available. You'll have more medical experts, doctors that are going to be available, and so on. You're going to have a cascading ripple effect that I think can have an impact across multiple industries. And I think it's the fastest way to get out of the hole that Africa has been in for several centuries now, right? So, anyways, that's just my current understanding of the situation, and why I think starting with that and trying to solve for that is a leading indicator that is going to have multiple positive outputs and outcome in different areas.
Yeah. A good huge takeaway is just the importance of education in all its formats, in all its different means of distribution, in all its different audiences, geographically, what have you. Um, that's kind of the biggest puzzle to fix. How do we get our people educated, and not just in the traditional format of education of just going to school, physics, mathematics, but education on different topics that affect us as an African populace. That is going to be the biggest puzzle to fix. But it's a challenge, but it's a beautiful thing in equal measure, because if we do it right, when we do it right, um, it's gonna be a different Africa, and that's gonna be a beautiful thing to see. So it's not all gloom. There's some light. We just need to get to it. Yeah.
There
Absolutely.
is chance. And then a very controversial idea or solution I think is coming our way as Africa is TikTok.
Mm,
And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is,
mm,
as with the youth being the majority, with the youth being the majority users of TikTok, with TikTok offering the solution of different languages and communities being represented and
mm,
different algorithms speaking to the different people, there
mm,
is a chance for us to really leverage this platform in sharing these conversations and encouraging people to listen in. And why
mm,
I've referenced that is, as Africa, especially the East Africa, we've been having a lot of demonstrations in
Mm.
respect to the political situation, with the
mhm,
things that we don't really feel that align to the future as of now I'm speaking as a youth, as a Gen Z. So there's a lot of back and forth with some of the investments that are being done or conversions that are being done. So TikTok has been an avenue where there has been a lot of education on what are your rights, what does it mean to have a voter's card, what is a process of
mm,
balloting, how do you tick the correct box, and you can see how it's simplified from the English to Swahili to vernaculars, and if
mm,
this can also be translated to climate conversations, it can be an avenue to bridging the access to information if we can compare this era and maybe earlier on. But it's going
uh-huh.
to be an exciting time, and we have opportunity to really own the transition and to really own a just transition.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like you meet your audience where they are. And I
Exactly.
mean, what you're doing now is a practical example. The conversation that we're having a few years back, it would have been like we write a book, and it's authored by
Mhm.
Helen, Lorraine, Brian. But now we get together online, in different parts of the world and just kind of break it down into like an hour or so. And we've gone through so many different topics. So it is just leveraging different means of spreading education or spreading information. So it is going to be
Even
good. It's
yeah,
going to be
even
good.
something I and the viewers would like to appreciate you, Brian and Hylom, is even by the act of having this session, you've disseminated information in its own manner. We've left some things on intergenerational dialogue, just transition, UNFCC, Paris Agreement. So you're also still building on that aspect of creating a solution for access to information. So we have potential to really rewrite our story and our narrative. Mm.
I love it. I've learned a lot. I've learned a
Yeah,
lot.
I
It's
agree.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, and
Any
Larry, we need experts like you as well. That is in this field, and we need to show as many of the young minds, um, and in particular, especially in this type of industry, the engineering industry. If you're okay with it, I'll mention this in the technology industry. We don't have a lot of young women, young girls involved in it. And so I think it's refreshing to have you here and be a voice to kind of represent not only obviously Africa, to represent yourself, country, but also all those young girls, young women who are out there not realizing or don't have this concept that it's possible for them because they were never told it was possible. So there's another element I think I was so happy to hear that you were going to join us today as well. That I think gives a different tone, if you will, and a different avenue for young girls and young women to be inspired and to dive into this field because I've learned a lot just from this session, and I feel like there are ways from this conversation that we can take next steps. Using different pieces and cuts of this data, but this conversation as well as other data really helping them understand what it is, and how it works. So gaining that basic fundamental understanding, so it's not like this far-reaching thing. Conceptually, they can get it. And then we go into what does this mean for them when it comes to being able to leverage it to better their lives or to have access to rich resources that they don't have today. And then how does this translate to economics, being able to be in these fields and high paying jobs, if you will. And then finally, how do we keep all this within Africa? Because everything that's beautiful and rich about Africa is typically exploited and it leaves Africa. Like, how about we stop doing that? How about, we leave it within Africa, let the people benefit, and then it can go to different parts of the world, of course, thereafter. But we need to change that perception. Like, it's rich and designed that way for a reason, and we have to leverage it first for the people. Then it can go broadly and benefit others that really are interested in it.
True. The first beneficiaries need to be Africans. I agree.
Absolutely.
And I know we're concluding, but it's just a very interesting conversation. Something I also appreciate where we're heading as a continent is the startup culture. So there's a lot of encouragement that's going to these different young professions to think of how can I use my expertise to create a solution that can be stationed within my country. So
Yes.
reducing the whole labor migration issue. And I'm really looking forward to see how the startup economy will really develop and probably be even, a leading continent in this research and development and innovation space, especially in the matters of climate change and energy.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
All right. Hopefully you'll be joining us in more sessions and being a part of this. Our intent is really to do exactly what we're doing today, is to have these really tough conversations, to learn from these conversations, but more importantly, to be able to share it with enough minds. We may not be able to solve it ourselves. Like, that's not, if we can, fantastic, right? And if we have the ability to, we should. But the goal and intent is to inspire as many people as possible so that those who are waiting to do something can get in the field and not be in the sideline anymore and actively do something about this.
That's good. Yes. Very. Please, Brian, reach out to me anytime. And then something else that I would appreciate to talk about is green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Because green hydrogen in itself still has very limited information to us as Kenya, as Africa, on the potential it offers to us as an economy. And since we've said that one of the pillars us as Africa are looking forward to is exploring the supply chain, because that's the only way we'll be able to hold our expertise within our country, because we have our eyes open to the different places we can translate our expertise. So on a different session, I'd be very happy to take you through the technicalities and just simplify it for any person, be it you're from a technical background, be it from your non-technical background. We can be able to see how you can transition without having to go back to the drawing board. You can just upskill and transition and support your respective African continent in aligning to this, because the global north is particular in hydrogen production, green hydrogen production, and there's no other continent that can meet that demand other than Africa. So how do we position ourselves for the benefit of that?
Benefit the most.
So you'll be seeing my face quite often, and hopefully to the viewers. Please rally Brian and Hylom to invite me once more. Yes.
I think it's a good place to wrap it up for today.
Yep.
But thanks everyone. To our viewers, hopefully we get as much content, as much conversation, as much discussion your way. We live, we learn. I think that's how we said it. We live, we learn. All right. Well,
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
This is very insightful. Definitely looking forward to continuing this conversation, leveraging your expertise and your passion for this.
Absolutely. All right. Until next time.
Thanks.
Bye.